The first sound Gabriel Mercer noticed was not the music. It was the small, hard sound of something delicate striking stone. One of the bride's pearl hairpins had come loose and bounced across the chapel floor while the string quartet kept playing, like nothing in the world had gone wrong. 100 guests were still turned toward the altar. The flowers were still perfect, the candles were still burning. But behind the white roses and the polished smiles, the bride had stopped moving, and the groom was nowhere in sight. Gabe had spent the whole afternoon hauling extra chairs, fixing a sticking side door, and making sure the service wrap behind the old chapel stayed clear for deliveries. He was supposed to be invisible. That was the job. But then he heard a muffled sound from the front of the room that wasn't act of any ceremony. And when he looked up, he saw the woman in the ivory gown, gripping the wheels of her chair so hard her knuckles had gone colorless. What happened in the next few minutes would wreck the version of both their lives they had been trying to survive. If you're already in this story, tap like and tell me where you're listening from. By the time Gabe reached the edge of the altar rail, the minister had stepped back with the stunned politeness of a man who had not been trained for humiliation. A bridesmaid stood frozen, with one hand over her mouth. Someone in the second pew was whispering too loudly. Someone farther back had already lifted a phone. Celeste Rowan sat in the center of it all, in a fitted ivory gown with a cathedral-length veil cascading over the back of her chair, her chin tipped high in the controlled, murderous stillness of a woman, refusing to give strangers the satisfaction of seeing her break. Her groom, Preston Hale, had gone into the vestry 5 minutes earlier, after a whisper from his father, and had not returned. Gabe knew her name before that afternoon. Most people in Charleston did. Celeste Rowan was the founder and chief executive of Rowan Atlas, a high-end construction technology firm that had started in smart design and expanded into adaptive living systems after a highway crash 3 years earlier changed the shape of her life. Articles called her brilliant, difficult, exacting, fearless. The softer stories called her inspirational, which told Gabe more about the writers than it did about her. The only thing he knew for certain was that she had built a national company by the age of 31 and that the old stone chapel where she was supposed to be married had spent 3 weeks bragging about hosting the wedding of the year. Now the wedding of the year had gone dead silent, except for strings and whispers. The first person Celeste looked at was not the minister, or the bridesmaids, or the nearest relative. It was the side aisle where the service corridor door stood, half open, and there, by bad luck or good, stood Gabe in a navy work shirt with his venue badge clipped to his pocket and sawdust still caught at the edge of one sleeve. Their eyes met for one quick second. In that second he saw rage, not fragility, rage and humiliation, and the kind of cold control it took to keep both contained. Then the minister leaned in and said something Gabe couldn't hear. Celeste answered without moving her mouth much. The minister blanched. A bridesmaid hurried toward the vestry and returned alone, more whispering. The quartet faltered, restarted, and finally stopped. The guests began to understand. That was when the phone screens came up. Gabe moved before he had a plan. He crossed the front side aisle, came around the floral arch, and stopped just outside the radius of her gown. Up close, Celeste was even more composed than she had looked from a distance. Her makeup was untouched. Her back was perfectly straight, but her right hand had tightened around the bouquet so hard that the stems bent, and pinned near the satin wrap was a small enamel brooch shaped like a bluebird. "Do you want me to bring the car to the front?" Gabe asked quietly. "No," her voice was low and perfectly even. "I want every one of these people to stop looking at me." He glanced toward the main doors. Too late for that. The photographers outside would have already smelled blood. The front ramp emptied onto a gravel drive with no cover. The back of the chapel opened into a service hall and a narrow garden path that led toward the loading court. "There's a service exit behind you," he said. "It's clear." One of the bridesmaids bent down, flustered and wet-eyed. "Celeste, we can call security. We can—" "No." Celeste didn't raise her voice. She didn't, too. "No one touches me unless I ask." The bridesmaid drew back. Gabe looked at the chair, then at the aisle. The rear wheel on the right side had caught a twist of fallen tulle and rose garland during the stall at the altar. He crouched just enough to see it. If he stopped to untangle it in front of everyone, he would make the moment last. If he tried to force the chair backward, he risked tearing the gown or tipping her. Behind them, the whispering had thickened into a hush that carried the ugliest kind of hunger. He met her eyes again. If you want out now, I can carry you through the service hall. For the first time, something flickered across her face. Not weakness, shock, maybe, or maybe disbelief that the most practical sentence anyone had offered her all day had come from a facilities supervisor, with a tool pouch still looped at his hip. You don't even know me, she said. No, Gabe said, but I know we need to get you out before this becomes entertainment. Another phone lifted. Somewhere near the back, a woman actually gasped as if the scene belonged to her. Celeste exhaled once through her nose. Fine, she said. Do it quickly. He unhooked the tool pouch and let it drop beside the flowers. Then he stepped in close enough to say, I'm going to lift under your back and knees. If something hurts, tell me. I am not made of glass. I figured. The slightest change touched the corner of her mouth. Not a smile. More like a fracture in the wall. Gabe moved carefully. Her gown was heavy with beading. The satin outer skirt spread across her lap and snagged at the armrest. He freed it, slipped one arm behind her shoulders and the other beneath her knees, and lifted. She was lighter than the gown made her look and heavier than a frightened person should have been. For one small second her hands caught his shoulders in instinctive self-preservation, and he felt how rigidly she held herself together. The chapel went absolutely silent. He carried her down the side passage, while the bridesmaids gathered the train and veil behind them. Halfway to the service door, he heard a clink on the floor. The little bluebird brooch had come loose from the bouquet, and, dropped near the rail, he would come back for it later if it was still there. The service corridor smelled like flowers, brass polish, and rain coming through old stone. Gabe pushed the bar with his shoulder, entered the narrow back hallway, and kept walking. Celeste stared straight ahead. She didn't cry. She didn't say a word until they reached the loading court behind the chapel, where a black SUV waited under the awning, and two panicked security men had just realized what was happening. Put me in the passenger seat, she said. One of them can help. No, she said. You started it, you finish it. So he did. He set her down gently while one of the security men folded the chair. Her veil slipped over the seat and into the wet air. The bridesmaids arrived with the rest of the gown. One was crying in earnest now. Celeste didn't look at her. Only when Gabe stepped back did Celeste finally turn her head toward him. Up close he could see the fine tremor at the base of her throat. What's your name? She asked. Gabriel Mercer. She gave one clipped nod, as if storing the answer for later. Thank you, Mr. Mercer. Then the SUV door shut, and she was gone. Gabe stood under the awning for a long moment while rain began tapping the edge of the roof. He should have gone back to work. Instead, he walked into the emptying chapel, found his tool pouch beside the roses, and saw the bluebird brooch glinting against the stone. He picked it up and turned it over in his palm. Enamel, deep, cobalt wings, tiny gold beak, the pin bent slightly where it had struck the floor. On the back, in small engraved letters, were the words, "For clear weather." He slipped it into his shirt pocket because leaving it on the floor felt wrong. That night, his daughter Wren was still awake when he got home to the one-bedroom rental behind a hardware store on Rutledge Avenue. She had built a blanket fort across the foot of the couch and was waiting inside it, in pajamas, covered with stars. "You're late," she said, then narrowed her eyes the way only 7-year-olds and suspicious detectives can. "Also, your face looks weird." Gabe leaned down and kissed the top of her head. "Thank you for that medical assessment." His mother, who watched Wren after school and had stayed late because her son's life had not become magically easier just because his wife had died 2.5 years earlier, looked over from the kitchenette. Long day. Something like that. Gabe had once owned a small Finnish carpentry business. Then, Nora, his wife, had died from an infection that turned catastrophic in less than 48 hours, and the world he had built with schedules and invoices and optimism collapsed into medical bills, grief, and a 7-year-old who started sleeping with one hand wrapped around his t-shirt so she could tell if he tried to leave. The room, he sold the truck, then the tools he didn't absolutely need, then the business itself in pieces. The job at Ashby Hall, the event estate where the wedding had taken place, was the kind of work he took because it paid on time and didn't require him to pretend he knew where his life was headed. While Wren narrated a school day argument about whether snails had feelings, Gabe emptied his pockets onto the little table by the couch. Keys, tape measure, receipt, bluebird brooch. Wren noticed it instantly. That's pretty. It belongs to someone. Then why sit here? He told the story in the simplest possible form. A bride had a bad day. He helped her leave. This fell off. He needed to return it. Wren grew solemn. Bad like cake fell over. Bad or bad like crying in the bathroom? Bad? Worse than cake? She considered that with proper gravity. You should give it back quick. Pretty things feel sad when they think they got left. His mother gave him a look over Wren's head. She knew him too well to ask more in front of the child. Later, when Wren was asleep with the fort half collapsed around her, she asked, "And what exactly did you get dragged into today?" Gabe told her enough. His mother whistled under her breath. That poor woman. He shook his head. She'd hate being called that. Then what would she prefer? Gabe thought of the straight line of Celeste Rowan's shoulders as the chapel watched her public life split open. Probably a clean exit, and for everyone to mind their own business. The next morning, every local site had the photographs. Socialite groom disappears. CEO left at altar. Mystery man carries bride from chapel. One blurry image showed Gabe halfway through the side door with Celeste in his arms and her veil trailing behind him like torn weather. The venue manager made a face, told him to keep his head down, and asked whether any reporters had contacted him. They hadn't. At 10:40, while he was replacing a damaged porch rail at the North Garden House, his supervisor called him to the office. A woman in a charcoal suit was waiting beside the desk. She introduced herself as Lenora Pike, Director of Legal Affairs for Rowan Atlas. Ms. Rowan would like a word, she said. With me? With you? He expected some kind of formality, maybe an NDA, maybe a thank you card with uncomfortable zeros. Instead, a black town car drove him across the peninsula to a waterfront property on South Battery, where old money and new architecture had reached an uneasy truce. The house was all glass, pale wood, and harbor light. Inside, everything was immaculate in a way that felt less luxurious than defended. Celeste waited in a large office, with a long table full of reports and a wall of windows facing the water. She had traded ivory silk for a steel gray blouse and black trousers, if not for the chair and the bruised shadows under her eyes. Yesterday might have been a rumor. The bluebird brooch lay on her desk the moment he placed it there. This was pinned to your bouquet, he said. Her gaze dropped to it. Something gentled. Briefly, my mother's. She reached out and touched one cobalt wing with a single finger. She wore it on storm days. I'm glad it made it back. She looked up. So am I. Sit down. He sat. Celeste folded her hands. My house manager resigned this morning. Gabe blinked. I'm sorry to hear that. She did it while apologizing to me and crying about online harassment. My executive assistant is with my board in New York. My operations chief is trying to keep our Austin launch from catching fire. And for the next 6 weeks, I need someone in this house who can run a schedule, coordinate vendors, manage personal logistics, and not melt under pressure. He stared at her. Why are you telling me this? Because I'm offering you the position temporarily. That deserved silence. She mistook it for reluctance. The compensation is substantial. Housing, optional. Hours ugly. Discretion non-negotiable. I fixed door frames and moved banquet tables. You also assessed an impossible exit in 3 seconds. Spoke to me like a person instead of a cautionary tale, and did not sell your story by breakfast. I can teach process. I can't teach steadiness. He should have said no. The smart answer was no. He had a stable job, or as stable as anything got. Wren's school sat 3 blocks from his mother's apartment. His whole life depended on routines held together with string and determination. Taking a 6-week role inside the home of a famously demanding chief executive who had just been publicly abandoned sounded like volunteering to be hit by weather. Then he remembered his rent increase notice on the counter and the estimate for Wren's new inhaler. and the text from his landlord asking, not unkindly, whether next month would again be a few days behind. What exactly would I be doing? He asked. Celeste's expression shifted. She had expected refusal or gratitude. Practical questions pleased her more. Everything my life currently needs and does not have. Calendar triage, personal transport coordinator, in-house problem solving, vendor management, some document handling, some project support. My home office and my company are not fully separate at the moment. That sounds like 3 jobs? It is, she said, which is why I'm paying for 3. He almost smiled. I have a daughter, he said. She's 7. I can't live here full time. That can be accommodated. I only need proof that if something is on fire, metaphorically or otherwise, you won't become decorative. That time he did smile, a little. By Friday, Gabe Mercer had resigned from Ashby Hall, accepted a temporary contract with Rowan Atlas, and moved his mornings into Celeste Rowan's orbit. Wren stayed with his mother before and after school. He was at the Battery House by 7 o'clock each day, and back in time to collect her by dinner, unless a crisis bent the plan. The first crisis arrived before 8 on his first morning. The kitchen espresso machine flooded the counter. A local station requested comment on the wedding. A board packet failed to upload ahead of an emergency director's call. One of Celeste's physical therapy sessions had been moved across town. Loris wanted to know whether to bill the unused reception centerpieces. Gabe fixed the machine, deferred the station through legal, resent the board materials from a backup folder, rearranged transport, and told the florist to donate the flowers to the rehabilitation wing at St. Agnes and send the receipt. Celeste listened to that last part and looked up from her laptop. Why? She asked. Because throwing them out seemed petty, Gabe said. And because someone at St. Agnes probably deserves roses more than a ballroom trash bin. She held his gaze 1 second longer than necessary. Fine. That was how it started. Not gently, never gently. Celeste worked with the concentration of someone trying to outrun a story about herself. Rowan Atlas was weeks away from presenting a major adaptive housing prototype to a consortium of city developers in Atlanta, a project that could decide whether the company's next phase involved expansion or acquisition. Half the board wanted her to stay focused on premium tech interiors for luxury clients. Celeste wanted to steer the company toward modular, dignified living systems for aging adults, veterans, injured workers, and families caring for relatives at home. She said it was a market truth. Her board called it emotional drift. Her chairman, Whitaker Sloan, was all silver hair and reasonable menace. He called often, always with the tone of a man generously trying to protect her from herself. Take the quarter, Celeste. Public sympathy doesn't fix operational risk. You can't let the company become your biography. Gabe heard enough through doorways to understand the shape of the conflict. He also understood, within a week, why 11 separate business publications had described Celeste Rowan as formidable. She was smarter than most people in the room, and less forgiving than almost anyone. She cut to the core of conversations, hated dithering, and had almost no patience for soothing language. But he also noticed what others missed. She never asked anyone to do something she had not already asked of herself. She read every line. She noticed every change. And on the worst days, when pain ran like a live wire through her back and hips after therapy, she became sharper, not softer, as if clarity were the only revenge available. The house ran on ritual and defense. Mornings were black coffee, call reviews, and refusal to speak about the wedding. Tuesdays and Thursdays were physical therapy with Dr. Miriam Keene, who had the sturdy patience of someone impossible to intimidate. Afternoons were project briefings, investor pressure, and a steady parade of people who either wanted money, permission, or access. The bluebird brooch lived on the corner of Celeste's desk beside a paperweight of polished river stone, Gabe learned quickly. He built a system for the house vendors. He reorganized the office archive that no one had touched in months. He found 3 duplicate software licenses no one had canceled. He adjusted Celeste's route to therapy to avoid the one downtown corner where photographers still lingered like gulls. He discovered that when her pain spiked, She forgot lunch entirely, so he started placing a plate within reach, without comment. Sometimes she ignored it, sometimes it disappeared. By the second week, she had found 17 small things to criticize, and stopped criticizing 3 of them after he fixed the underlying problem before she named it. That was progress. The first genuine crack in the wall came on a Wednesday afternoon, when Ren's school nurse called to say a sudden electrical issue had closed the building early, and his mother was stuck at a cardiology appointment. Gabe stood outside Celeste's office, holding the phone. "I need 20 minutes," he said. "Maybe 30. Celeste was halfway through reviewing site renderings. "For what?" "My daughter needs collecting." Something unreadable moved through her face. "Take the car. I can call a ride." I said, "Take the car." He did. 36 minutes later, he was back, Ren beside him in the passenger seat with her backpack and a paper lunch sack she had insisted on bringing in case grown-ups forgot snacks existed. Gabe expected trouble. Instead, Celeste looked up from her laptop as they entered, saw the child, and went very still. Ren, red curls escaping a loose braid, stopped just inside the office and whispered, with all the false secrecy of children, "Is she the sad bride?" Gabe closed his eyes, briefly, indoor voice. Celeste's mouth changed again, not a smile, but close enough to prove the muscles still worked. "I was the bride," she said. "The sad part is negotiable." Ren considered that. "That's fair." She spent the next hour at the far end of Gabe's work table, coloring in silence so profound it could only come from a child who had been properly instructed not to bother adults. Twice Celeste glanced over. The third time she asked, "What are you drawing?" Ren held up the page. It showed a square house with a giant porch, a bluebird on the roof, and a person in a wheelie chair beside a man with very large hands. "A better wedding exit," she said. Gabe nearly choked. Celeste looked at the picture for a long moment. "The porch is excessive," she said. "People need room." Ren replied. That time Celeste actually smiled. Barely, but without defense. After that, the child became a breach in the fortress. Not often, not theatrically, just enough. On days when his mother's schedule required it, Ren spent an hour at the house after school. She read on the rug by the window or asked grave questions about architecture and whether rich people ever lost socks. Once, she walked into the office while Celeste was on a call and set down half a peanut butter sandwich without saying a word, then left again. Celeste stared at it like it might be a coded threat. "She thinks you forget to eat," Gabe said. "I do not forget. You forgot yesterday." That was strategic neglect. He let that pass. In the third week, while Gabe was reviewing a set of vendor invoices for a pilot project outside Savannah, he noticed something that bothered him. The framing allowances on one adaptive home model had climbed 12% in 2 months, despite no approved design change. The invoicing code belonged to a subcontractor he knew by reputation, Corbin Modular, a company that specialized in fast turnaround and elegant corner cutting. "You're paying for custom millwork that doesn't exist," he said later, sliding the pages onto Celeste's desk. She scanned them. "How do you know?" "Because I used to price finish work, and because this line item says premium lift compatible cabinetry on units whose cabinet run was standardized last quarter." Celeste picked up her phone immediately. 2 calls later, she had her project controller in a panic and her operations vice president promising a full reconciliation by morning. When she hung up, she looked at him differently. "What?" he asked. "You are wasted on banquet tables." "I've been told worse." The investigation widened. Corbin Modular wasn't simply overbilling. Someone inside Rowan Atlas had approved altered purchase orders. The Savannah pilot had become a leak, and a leak large enough to matter usually had a name behind it. Whitaker Sloan called within hours to urge caution. Preston Hale's father, who sat on an advisory committee and had always treated Celeste Company like a future annex to his own holdings, sent an email full of concern and subtext. Celeste grew colder, calmer, more dangerous. That same week, Dr. Keene added a new therapy block, focused on supported standing and trunk control. Gabe learned about it not because Celeste told him, but because he saw her come home from a session with her jaw locked, and her palms marked where she had gripped the bars too hard. She worked through the pain as if it offended her. One evening, while he was setting tomorrow's board materials in order, he heard a hard metallic sound from the gym room off the back hall. Not a crash, a drop brace. He paused at the doorway, just as Dr. Kane said. That was 12 seconds. Celeste was between the parallel bars, shoulders trembling, sweat darkening the hair at her temples. 12 is not a headline, she said. No, Dr. Kane said. It's a start. Gabe stepped away before either woman noticed him. He didn't mention it. The next morning he lowered a shelf in the office by 2 inches so Celeste could reach it without twisting, and moved a heavy set of sample binders closer to her main table. She noticed. She always noticed. She said nothing. Later he found the bluebird brooch shifted from the desk corner to the center, as if weather itself had been moved into view. By the end of the month, the house no longer felt like enemy territory. It felt like work. Hard work. Meaningful work. The kind that built private rhythms. Gabe knew which hours to leave Celeste alone with strategy, memos, and which hours she needed him to ask one blunt question. He knew she hated lilies, refused euphemisms, and read old detective novels when pain kept her awake. She knew he drank bad coffee, kept an extra inhaler for Ren in his bag, and went quiet around anniversaries instead of sad. The first time she asked about Nora came after the power flickered, during a storm, and the whole house went dark for 9 seconds. Ren was upstairs doing spelling words at the guest desk. Gabe was in the utility room, resetting the backup transfer, when Celeste wheeled into the doorway with a battery lamp balanced on her lap. You know where everything in this house is, she said. It's my job. No, your job is technically other things. This is how you survive. He finished the reset. The emergency lights softened to a steadier glow. Outside, harbor wind flung rain at the windows. It used to be our thing, he said before he could overthink it. Nora and me. Storm routines. Flashlights, candles. Make sure the window by the bed was latched because she hated the whistle. Celeste didn't interrupt. She died in August, he went on, voice level because grief had long since changed shape. It was hot enough to feel unreal. Hospital air conditioning, bright hallways, everyone saying words like complications and aggressive. Ren was 5. I kept waiting for the world to look different after. It didn't. That was the worst part. The silence that followed was not empty. It made room. When I woke up in rehab, Celeste said finally, eyes on the lamp instead of him. Everyone was so relieved I was alive that no one knew what to do with my anger. They kept trying to translate it into gratitude. He looked at her. Preston stayed then, she said. For appearances, for history, for guilt. Maybe pick whichever one makes you least tired. I stayed with him because leaving would have meant admitting I had been loved. Poorly on top of everything else. It felt like too many losses for one body to hold. Gabe leaned back against the panel box. Rain moved across the glass in long silver sheets. What changed? He asked. The prenup. Her laugh was short and astonishingly without humor. My mother built provisions into the company trust years ago. If I married, no spouse got voting rights, and no spouse could inherit board control through me. Preston learned that the morning of the wedding. His father likely learned it the night before. Apparently romance did not survive governance. And he'd just left. He told me I had made a fool of him. Her face did not move. Then he gave me the ring box and walked out the vestry door. Something in Gabe went cold at that. Not protective in the theatrical sense, just furious in the clean, practical way that came when cruelty exposed itself. I'm sorry, he said. She shook her head once. Don't be sorry. Just don't lie about what it was. He didn't break my heart. He confirmed what kind of man he was. And he picked the cruelest role. Impossible to do it. The power returned. The lamp brightened and then became unnecessary. Celeste turned her chair slightly toward the hall. Thank you, she said. For what? For not trying to make that gentler than it was. Segment by segment, though there were no spoken labels in their lives, the pressure increased. The Corbin investigation pointed upward, not downward. Purchase approvals had been routed through Rowan Atlas. as interim finance office while Celeste was out after the wedding. Someone had used the chaos to sign extensions and vendor changes that made the Savannah pilot appear more expensive and less viable than it truly was. The simplest end to that story was a board argument. The truer end smelled like sabotage. Whitaker Sloan scheduled a special board review in 10 days. "This is about optics," Celeste said after the call. "If they can portray my pilot as reckless spending, they can force a pause. If they force a pause, the Atlanta consortium disappears. If Atlanta disappears, the premium division, vultures, get their acquisition path." "You think Sloan is inside it?" Gabe asked. "I think Whitaker prefers tidy wars with deniable fingerprints." She tasked Gabe with compiling every field-level change order tied to Savannah. He worked late, sometimes past midnight, comparing invoices, metadata, and scanned signatures while Celeste built her defense packet. Wren slept in the guest room twice that week, because taking her home at 11 and hauling her back for school at 7 would have been its own cruelty. Oddly, the house became warmer with the child in it. She left markers uncapped and socks in impossible locations. She asked Celeste whether bluebirds were mean in real life. She informed the cook that all soup should include stars if the situation allowed. On the 7th night of the audit push, Gabe came downstairs at 1 a.m. for water and found Celeste alone in the office with the bluebird brooch in her hand. "You should be asleep," he said. "So should you." He leaned against the doorframe. "What does for clear weather mean?" She looked at the brooch. "My mother said storms tell you who has built well and who has only decorated." She wore it on days when she needed reminding. "You keep it on your desk now." She nodded once. "I'm trying not to confuse ruin with weather." He felt that sentence land somewhere deep. That's a hard distinction. It is when people profit from pretending the storm is you. He should have left the room then. Instead, he crossed to the desk and set down the bottle of water he had brought. Their hands touched by accident. Barely. Celeste stilled. So did he. Nothing happened in the obvious sense. No declarations, no cinematic mistake. Just two exhausted people standing in the same pool of light, too aware of each other to call it anything else. Then Wren appeared in the hall in mismatched pajamas. "I had a bad dream," she announced. Then saw their faces and frowned. "Did I interrupt a grown-up staring contest?" Gabe huffed a laugh. Celeste looked away fast enough to reveal herself. "Come here," Gabe said. Wren climbed into his lap once he sat on the sofa. Half asleep, she studied Celeste. "You look less mad these days," she said. "That is a dangerous rumor," Celeste replied. Wren yawned. "You can be nice and scary together. Aunt May does it all the time." After Gabe took her back to bed, he found a single line added to tomorrow's task list in Celeste's neat handwriting. "Confirm Atlanta venue access." It took him a full 10 seconds to realize she had also drawn a tiny bluebird in the corner. The setback came exactly where real life likes to place them. After hope had become measurable. 2 days before the board review, the consolidated audit file disappeared from the secure drive and reappeared in the inboxes of 3 board members with alterations designed to make Celeste look incompetent and Gabe look involved. Metadata showed the packet had been exported from his login at 11:43 p.m. the same morning. A gossip site ran photographs of Gabe lifting Celeste from the chapel. Then newer photos of him pushing her chair along the battery path with Wren skipping beside them. The headline called him the live-in fixer. The story implied exploitation, emotional dependency, and company impropriety all at once. By 9, Whitaker Sloan was on speakerphone, asking whether Celeste had any explanation for why a temporary household employee was tied to confidential board materials and appearing in public as part of a domestic arrangement that could raise governance questions. Gabe stood near the windows, fury climbing his spine 1 measured inch at a time. Celeste's face went flat in the dangerous way he now recognized. "My explanation," she said, "is that someone believes misogyny and class contempt are still an argument." Whitaker sighed. "Be serious." "I am serious." Gabe heard his own name next. Not criminally, not directly, but enough to make the shape clear. If Celeste defended him, she looked compromised. If she dismissed him, the board could treat the incident as unfortunate but contained. When the call ended, the room held its breath. "You should terminate me," Gabe said first. Celeste's eyes flashed. "They want a firewall. Give them one. They want blood," she said, "and they are accustomed to people handing it over neatly." "That may be true," Gabe said. "But if I stay in this chairside circus they built, they get to talk about me instead of the numbers. And the numbers are the only part that matters." Celeste looked at him with something like betrayal and something like understanding fighting for ground. "You think walking out fixes this? I think stepping sideways might." He drew a breath. "My login was used because I've been in the files." "Fine. You place me on leave pending review." "Publicly. Privately, I keep working off-site on the vendor chain." They relax because they think the household complication is gone. "We hit them with the actual theft at the board session." Her hand tightened on the wheel rim. "You are not disposable." The sentence stopped him. Neither of them moved. Then Wren, who had been in the breakfast room with a workbook, and was never as far away as adults like to pretend, appeared in the doorway hugging a stuffed fox. She looked from one face to the other and understood enough. "Are you having the leaving kind of fight?" she asked softly. "Or the staying kind?" No one answered at once. Wren went to Celeste first. She set the fox in Celeste's lap. "If he goes home for work reasons, that's not leaving." "Leaving," she said with painstaking logic. "Also, people who lie are usually loud because they hope noise turns into truth." Then she turned to her father. "And when you get scared, you start acting like you're only a helper." "You're not only a helper." There it was. The child saying the unsayable. The thing both adults had been walking around, because naming it would make it more real than either had agreed to survive. Celeste looked down at the fox in her lap, then up at Gabe. The distance between them had changed again. He took the leave officially. By afternoon, he was back in his apartment with 2 bankers, boxes of copied field reports, and a burner laptop Lenora Pike had personally delivered with the words, "For the record, I despise this board." Wren did homework at the kitchen table, while Gabe reconstructed vendor pathways, delivery receipts, and approval signatures. His mother arrived with soup and a face that suggested she was ready to fight a corporation in the street, if needed. 48 hours of forensic work produced the missing turn. The altered purchase orders had not begun with finance at all. They began with a shell consulting entity that billed Rowan Atlas for market repositioning analysis and had been authorized under Whitaker Sloan's discretionary strategic budget. From there, the money traveled into Corbin Moe, Dueler via approved change orders. The point had been to inflate the adaptive pilot's cost and justify calling the program unstable. Once the project failed, a merger partner already favored by Sloan could acquire the division assets cheaply. Gabe found the link because one scanned freight ticket used the wrong load code, the same shorthand his old carpentry supplier had used for rush batches. Sloppy people always left fingerprints where they thought no one would look. Celeste came to the apartment that night with Lenora and a legal pad full of war. She had not been inside a place like Gabe's in years, maybe ever. Not because poverty offended her, but because her whole adult life had moved between boardrooms, clinics, and design spaces. Wren greeted her at the door with solemn hospitality and a paper sign that read, "No liars allowed." Celeste read it, nodded, and said, "Excellent policy." The 4 of them spread documents across Gabe's kitchen table. Soup steamed beside evidence binders. Rain tapped the little window above the sink. The room was too small for strategy and too honest for posturing. "This is enough to open discovery," Lenora said. "Maybe enough to freeze the vote if we force the issue properly." "No," Celeste said, after reading the final summary. "Not freeze, end it." The Atlanta Consortium presentation was still 3 days away. Even if she survived the board session, she needed a live proof that the adaptive line deserved backing. That was when the next shift happened, the one that turned survival into building. Wren, coloring bluebirds at the end of the table, looked up at a rendering of the Savannah unit and said, "That porch is still too small." Gabe blinked. She pointed. If someone has a wheelie chair and groceries and maybe a kid, they need turning room. Also a bench. Celeste stared at the page. Then she reached for a pencil. In less than 20 minutes, practical corrections began multiplying. Wider landing, storage at seated reach, hidden charging slots. Grab points that looked like design, not apology. A fold-away homework niche at kitchen height. A bathroom transfer zone that did not resemble a hospital. Gabe contributed from construction logic. Celeste translated into product architecture. Ren contributed a bench and somewhere for boots and bad days. They worked until midnight. What emerged was not just a defense of the Savannah pilot. It was a better version of it. Human-sized, family-sized. Not the board's luxury showcase, not a pity build, but a elegant, modular system that could work for people who had real lives and limited room for nonsense. What do we call it? Ren asked. Celeste looked at the bluebird. She had been absent-mindedly sketching in the page margin. Open weather, she said. Gabe looked at her. The house that holds through storms, she added, without announcing itself. He thought that might be the most personal sentence she had ever said aloud. The board session took place the next morning in the Charleston office tower, Rowan Atlas maintained, for East Coast operations. Celeste wore a navy suit, the bluebird brooch on the lapel. Whitaker Sloan entered with the composure of a man. Certain history would continue favoring him. He did not expect Lenora Pike to place subpoena-ready evidence packets at every seat. He did not expect Corbin's rush, the freight receipts, or the Shell consultancy link, or the email chain from his assistant, asking whether the household distraction angle should be kept warm for press use. He absolutely did not expect Celeste to let him finish his polished opening remarks before quietly dismantling him, line by line, document by document, until the room smelled of fear under expensive cologne. She did not raise her voice. That was the part Gabe admired most. Whitaker tried concern, then indignation, then contempt. By the time he reached denial, 2 board members were already asking legal whether they were personally exposed. Preston Hale's father, attending remotely, disconnected without a word. The vote that had been meant to sideline Celeste became a vote to remove Whitaker as chair pending full investigation. When it was over, Lenora leaned toward Gabe and murmured, "I would hate to play cards against that woman. You and me both," he said. The Atlanta presentation should have been easy. After that, it wasn't. Real victories rarely simplify in time. They compress. Celeste had less than 48 hours to transform a near scandal into a future, and the consortium had already heard rumors. If she wanted open weather funded, she needed more than renderings. She needed proof of concept, proof of leadership, and proof that the project was not an emotional reaction to private pain. So they built a live demonstration suite, overnight, in a vacant harborfront warehouse Rowan Atlas had once used for materials exhibitions. Crews moved under floodlights. Gabe coordinated carpenters, electricians, and installers with the calm force of a man returning to an older self. Celeste rewrote the deck, resequenced the walkthrough, and cut every sentimental phrase. Ren, after school, sat on a sample bench and declared it acceptable for boots and bad days. At 3 a.m., Gabe found Celeste alone beside the finished entry platform, staring at the turning radius, with the focused exhaustion of someone who had no room left for adrenaline. "It works," he said. "It might," she said. He came to stand beside her. "You know what I mean." Her hands rested on the wheels without moving. "Do you ever get tired of being the calm one? Constantly?" That pulled a laugh from her, soft and surprised. Then she looked at him fully, and the air changed. "I missed you in the house," she said. There are sentences that take years to arrive and still sound plain when they finally do. This was one. He answered just as plainly. "I missed you too." No dramatic step followed. No kiss in the warehouse light. Just the truth, set down between them where both could see it. The consortium event filled by 10 the next morning. Developers, civic leaders, investment partners, journalists who had come hoping for either redemption or spectacle. Celeste gave them neither. She gave them a system. Open weather was presented, not as a charity concept, but as an elegant, adaptive housing line designed for dignity, flexibility, and long-term market reality. Gabe handled the live demo walkthrough with 2 project leads, explaining storage runs, threshold tolerances, and power routing solutions with quiet authority. Ren, in the back with Gabe's mother, sat swinging her legs and taking the whole thing more seriously than some analysts. Then came the final part. The lectern at the front of the warehouse had been left empty because Celeste had planned to present from her chair beside the display wall. 10 minutes before the close, she changed her mind. Dr. Keene was there, invited quietly. So was Lenora. So was half a room of people who had once mistaken endurance for passivity. Celeste wheeled to the sidebray station, accepted the forearm crutches Miriam offered, and rose. The room went still, in a way completely different from the chapel. Not hungry, reverent, almost. But Celeste had never cared much for reverence. She stood because she wanted the final visual truth to belong to her, and not to any headline. She stood because 12 seconds had become 28, then 40, then the harder thing. Belief. She stood because storms reveal what was built well. With the bluebird glinting at her lapel, she crossed the short distance to the lectern and delivered the closing remarks upright. Not long, not theatrically, long enough. 31 seconds, Gabe would remember later. 31 steady, shaking, magnificent seconds. Then she settled back into the chair and continued speaking without the slightest hint that anyone should clap for her body. What she asked the room to notice instead was the design, the market, the families who would live better because no one had confused accessibility with surrender. They funded the pilot before lunch. The weeks that followed were less dramatic and more consequential, which is how real changes prove themselves. Whitaker Sloan resigned under investigation. Corbin Modular lost its contracts, and then, piece by piece, its usefulness. Preston Hale attempted one public statement about privacy and mutual respect that the internet treated with the contempt it deserved. Open Weather became a funded division inside Rowan Atlas with plans for 3 pilot communities. Gabe did not return to event work. Celeste offered him a role, leading field integration and user experience implementation. Her elegant phrase, for making sure brilliant design did not become unlivable nonsense. He accepted, after negotiating 2 things: regular hours that still let him be Ren's father first, and absolute veto power over any porch too small for groceries. Children. And bad days. Arrogant, Celeste said. Experienced, he replied. By then the house on South Battery no longer felt like a defended museum. It felt lived in. Ren's rain boots appeared near the kitchen bench twice a week. There were books stacked in the office. Celeste had started keeping fruit where she could actually reach it, instead of where a stylist once thought it should sit. Sometimes at night she and Gabe argued cheerfully about materials costs or whether hidden support bars should match hardware finishes. Sometimes they sat in companionable silence while Ren built impossible pillow forts nearby. The ordinary parts were what made it real. The romance, when it finally stepped into the open, did so with far less drama than the world would have expected. It happened on a Sunday evening, after the first open weather site visit in Savannah, when the 3 of them returned, windblown and tired, and Ren fell asleep in the car, with a granola wrapper in her fist. Gabe carried the child inside and laid her on the sofa. When he turned back, Celeste was in the doorway to the office, holding the bluebird brooch. I've been thinking, she said. That's usually dangerous. She rolled her eyes. I'm trying to offer tenderness, Gabriel. Work with me. That nearly undid him on the spot. She looked down at the brooch, then back at him. The worst day of my life turned into the day I met you. I am still angry it had to happen that way, but I'm no longer angry that it happened. He stepped closer. I don't want to be rescued, she said. I think you know that. I do. I do want... She stopped, gathered herself, started again. I want what this is becoming. If you do. He had loved her for longer than he had allowed himself to name. Not the public woman. Not the wounded one alone. Not only the fierce one in boardrooms. The whole difficult, exacting, brave arrangement of her. He answered carefully. because care was the truest thing he had. "I do," he said. So he kissed her, there in the office doorway, while harbor light went gold across the floor and the child snored softly from the sofa. It was not a triumphant kiss. It was a relieved one. A beginning kiss. The kind people earn by telling each other the truth for a very long time first. Months later, when the first open-weather pilot opened outside Savannah, the porch was exactly the right size. Families toured the model home. Investors shook hands. Reporters asked better questions than they had a season earlier. Wren cut a ribbon with oversized ceremonial scissors and nearly fell over laughing. Gabe's mother cried discreetly into a handkerchief and denied it when asked. Celeste spoke briefly, seated this time by choice, and introduced the division leaders. When she introduced Gabe, she did not call him her fixer, her assistant, or the man from the wedding photograph everyone still secretly remembered. She called him the partner who made sure the company's promises could survive intact with real life. Later, after the crowd thinned, Wren wandered onto the porch with the bluebird brooch balanced in both palms. "Miss Celeste said you should keep it for 1 minute," she told Gabe, "because clear weather means different things now." He turned the enamel bird over in his hand. For clear weather. Celeste came to stand beside them, chair angled toward the marshlight. Her expression held that calm strength he had first mistaken for coldness. "My mother thought storms were tests," she said. "I think maybe they're introductions." "To what?" Wren asked. Celeste looked at Gabe before she answered. "To what was built well." Wren seemed satisfied by that. She leaned against Gabe's leg, then against Celeste's chair, connecting them with the casual authority children have over truths. Adults still circle. In the end, that was the real shape of the story. Not a public humiliation redeemed by a prettier chapter. Not a parable about endurance. Not even a love story first, though it became one. It was a story about refusal. A woman refused to let the worst room of her life define the rest of it. A man refused to treat steadiness like a small thing. A child refused to let either of them hide behind usefulness when belonging was the truer word. People looking from the outside would always prefer the dramatic image. The abandoned bride in ivory. The single dad carrying her through a side door while the chapel held its breath. But images are easy. Lives are built in the quieter parts that follow, in corrected invoices and school pickups, in late-night design changes and plates set within reach, in the painful work of learning that dependence is not the same as surrender, and that dignity does not shrink when it is shared. The chapel photograph remained online somewhere, flattened into gossip and angles. The life that came after it did not fit as neatly into a frame. That was probably for the best. Some things stop being spectacle the moment they become true. On the evening they finally left the pilot site for good. Wren ran back from the porch because she had forgotten her drawing pad. Gabe waited by the truck. Celeste turned one last time toward the finished home, the marsh beyond it, silver under the falling light. Then she looked at him, and with the dry certainty he had come to depend on, she said, "The porch is still slightly excessive." "It's exactly right," he said. She tilted her head. "You're impossible. Occupational hazard." Wren came tearing back, breathless and triumphant, the drawing pad overhead. She wedged herself between them, as if the position had been reserved all along. Celeste took the bluebird brooch from her lapel and pinned it carefully to the front page of Wren's pad, where a crooked little house stood under a large square porch, with far too much room and a bench waiting by the door for clear weather. Then the three of them went home.